Hello, welcome to another moral psychology video. Today, I've got a nice short and sweet one for you. Introduction to moral psychology. If you're like, what the heck is moral psychology? But I don't want to go watch a whole bunch of videos about it. Here is a great video for you. Short and sweet. Let's talk about moral psychology. If you've heard of the show The Good Place, it's going to be helping me out as we go through this presentation. My name is Jillian Lee Meyer, by the way. I am a social psychology and cognitive science dual PhD at Indiana University Bloomington, studying moral psychology. Here we go. So a little outline, give you an idea of where we're going. What is the moral and moral psychology? What is the psychology in moral psychology? And then finally, just a little bit of an introduction to moral measures. How do we determine what we research in moral psychology, or what is good or bad, the big question everybody asks. We're going to start out with a little clip from The Good Place here. Enjoy.
Oh, God! Michael, what did you do?
I made the trolley problem real so we could see how the ethics would actually play out. There are 5 workers on this track and 1 over there. Here are the levers to switch the tracks. Make a choice.
The thing is, ethically speaking...
No time, dude! Make a decision!
Well, it's tricky. On the one hand, if you ascribe to a purely utilitarian moral view...
Okay. So, what did we learn?
Oh!
Good. So what is that? That was a real life depiction of the trolley problem. You've probably heard of the trolley problem. It was written by Philippa Foot. Basically, it says there are 2 tracks. Your trolley's running down one track that's about to kill 5 people, but you could change the trolley direction and head it in a way that will only kill 1 person. What do you do? So the moral and moral psychology, we're going to take it back to philosophy, do a little philosophy overview of stuff we look at as psychologists when we do morality. One example of a framework is utilitarianism. You've heard of Bentham, John Stuart Mill. Basically, that's net happiness, if you were to quantify happiness and unhappiness, and the minimization of harm. So if you think about this trolley problem, you can switch the track and only kill 1 person instead of killing 5. You're saving 5 people instead of 1. You're saving 5 families instead of 1 family. You're saving 5 sets of friends instead of just 1 set of friends. So you might say it's the ethical decision to switch the trolley and kill the 1 person. Now, deontology, Immanuel Kant, is a little different. It has more of a focus on fundamental rights and principles, rules and duties that we always need to follow. So if you have the principle of do no harm, never kill anybody, you shouldn't be touching the lever at all. Yeah. If you think that all the time disloyalty is bad, you should never be disloyal, you follow that your whole life. Honesty, you should always be honest, never dishonest, you follow that no matter what. So again, in this sense, every human has a fundamental right to be alive, and murder is always wrong. You would just let the trolley go. So you can see how these 2 different frameworks change the way that we consider ethical decisions and can change our ultimate decision in something like the trolley problem. The last one is the focus of a lot of character education efforts when it comes to moral psychology adjacent research. Aristotle came up with the idea of virtue ethics, focused on the virtues, focused on certain character traits. The way I always describe it is if you go into like a high school or an elementary school, sometimes they'll have these big banners of like respect and loyalty, fairness, things like that, kindness. It's kind of like you're cultivating all of those virtues or all of those character traits within yourself. And it's an ongoing process. And so you're always working on those virtues. You're always working on yourself to make yourself more honest. And it sees decisions not so black and white as completely right or completely wrong. So you might hear more about that in the character education world. Another part of that too, you might be thinking, wait a second, but if you're honest all the time, if you're super, super honest and you've cultivated that virtue a lot, then, that seems like a bad thing to always be honest to somebody. But part of virtue ethics, you have this idea of phronesis. And what that is basically like your wise mind when it comes to decision making. You're either, you're right in the middle between too courageous and brave or too fearful and scared. You want that right amount. So you're not reckless when you're brave, but you're also brave enough that you're not just shy and not experiencing all the opportunities you could be. So that was one of my first impressions of virtue ethics. I was like, wait a second, but being super, super honest doesn't seem like it's always the right decision. So wanted to clarify that for you, especially for my psychologists in the room. That's a little overview of the moral psychology. Now with our empirical work, we can think about things like, how do people rationalize their moral decisions, maybe get qualitative research asking people, what would you do in this moral dilemma and why would you do it? Then isolating, okay, they seem to be using a utilitarian framework where they're talking about the consequences of their actions and, you know, nothing bad is going to happen. Or maybe they're focusing on exemplifying a certain character trait like honesty, and that's what led them to their decision. They say, you know, honesty is a virtue that I wish to have. So then we can compare different things, look for individual differences, but that's a little overview of the moral psychology. Now, the psychology of moral psychology, basically, in most of the ways, I think you can take that morality piece and apply it to pretty much all of these domains of psychology, which is really, really cool. If you think about some of the research that we already have out there, developmental psychology, some of the first things written about morality, especially with empirical research, Kohlberg stages, REST defining issues test that goes with it. Evolutionary psychology, you have this idea of survival of the fittest almost, of our moral traits and what benefited our ancestors to stay alive the most. You have moral sense theory with Darwin, Jonathan Haidt and his moral foundations theory. Cognitive psychology, it branches into neuroscience. So you can look at dual process models of moral psychology and moral decision making, your intuitive, emotional reactions versus your reasoned conscious actions like Joshua Green has done. So the psychology in moral psychology is basically, let's look at everything, you know, like what does it look like in kids or throughout the lifespan? What does it look like throughout all of time? What benefited our in-group when it came to survival with morality? We wanted loyalty and we wanted fairness within the group. Cognitive, now we can ask questions about what brain regions are activated when we make different moral decisions. Is there really a dual process, and how much of a role do each of those respectively play in our moral decisions? Again, so much we can do with psychology, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So the way you can think about it kind of as a good separation of philosophy and psychology, because you might be thinking at this point, okay, so like they're both studying morality, moral psychology, and philosophy. What is the difference? A way you can think about this division is that philosophy is more prescriptive. So it's what should you do? You should be a utilitarian. You should focus most on the consequences of your actions. Aristotle would say you should focus on these virtues. You should focus on your practical wisdom skills. Psychology, on the other hand, is descriptive. So that means we're saying, what do people do? We're saying this population uses more utilitarian arguments in their moral decision making than deontological arguments in their decision making. This group of people focus more on their evolutionary moral values than they did their more secular contemporary moral values. So philosophy is saying, this is what you should do when you're making decisions. This is how to be a good person. Psychology, we're just describing, you know, I think we have a little bit of the easier job when it comes to theory, because I don't know how I would make decisions like that. Philosophers are very smart. But what comes in the middle? All of these things that bridge philosophy and psychology. When it comes to moral psychology, we're studying right versus wrong. Again, philosophy will say, this is right, this is wrong. Psychology is more, this is what this group of people are doing, how they believe right versus wrong. Ethics and character education. I mentioned that Aristotle's virtue theory is very common when it comes to character efforts. So you might see it there. Ethics education, you see a bridge in methodologies there where you're wanting to do an ethics or education, character education workshop, but you need some kind of assessment tool so you can show people how they're making their moral decisions, or you want to assess whether moral development improves over the lifespan. That's where you kind of need psychologists. So you need that philosophy theory of how do we teach, and what are we teaching with these moral frameworks in the background. But psychology, you put that in and you say, here's how we can do it. So again, that intersection works both with the theory as well as with our methodologies. Empirical philosophy, I wanted to say too, is a field of philosophy that is very similar to moral psychology. It's a little more philosophy based. Moral psychology is a little more assessment and methodology heavy, but empirical philosophy or empirical philosophers are people that are doing a lot of similar work to moral psychology. So you might hear that term as well. Then I wanted to put into the idea of moral frameworks. This is something that we can use, taking morality as a whole and breaking it up into different ways of seeing the world. We can use that with philosophy when it comes to older theories and kind of foundational frameworks for moral psychology. But then in psychology, we use a lot of similar ideas to moral frameworks like personality tests or other scores of individual differences. So that is an idea that you'll see pretty common in both areas. But you can see here the biggest difference, prescriptive versus descriptive, but all of this in the middle that you can do both with. All right, see our video.
This is a quick litmus test. Handful of questions designed to tell whether you are fundamentally good or bad. Question number 1. Did you ever commit a serious crime, such as murder, sexual harassment, arson, or otherwise?
No.
Did you ever have a vanity license plate like Mama's BMW, Lexus for Liz, or Boob Guy?
No.
Did you ever reheat fish in an office microwave?
Ew, no.
Have you ever paid money to hear music performed by California funk rock band the Red Hot Chili Peppers?
No.
Were you ever a waiter, and when seeing a customer who had eaten all his or her food, you said sarcastically, "Guess you hated it"?
No.
Have you ever used the word hubby or referred to the department store Target as Target?
No.
Did you ever take off your shoes and socks on a commercial airline?
And socks? Ew, who would do that?
People who go to the bad place, Eleanor, that's the point.
That is such a funny clip. Especially because that is probably the #1 question I get asked as a moral psychologist. People say, oh, well, am I a good person or a bad person? Oh, I made this decision in a moral dilemma. Was it good or bad? Like they expect we have some kind of litmus test like that to say you're definitively a good or you're a bad person for listening to the Red Hot Chili Peppers and microwaving fish in the office, you know, but people want to know about that. And it's a very interesting area of research for moral psychology and empirical philosophy. So a couple of the biggest ones that I wanted to point out, I have a couple other videos on the idea of dual process theory. Some of them get a little more research heavy than others. But basically this idea is that you have this conscious rational mind that makes moral decisions, and you also have this subconscious intuitive mind that might be making your moral decisions. So basically what you've heard with system 1, quick automatic intuitive reasoning, and system 2, slower conscious reasoning, maybe in another cognitive psychology class, same kind of idea with moral intuition and moral reasoning. So back here, you've probably heard of Kohlberg's stages of moral development. It's one of the only things I think that's typically taught in an AP psychology course or Psych 101 that really directly has to do with morality. Maybe they're teaching moral foundations now, but Kohlberg is very foundational. He talked about how our moral development happens and how we become better at making decisions when it comes to ethics when we're older. So at the beginning, you know, we get a sense of right and wrong from what our parents say when we're young. So what is right is what my mom is telling me. What is wrong is what my mom is telling me is wrong, that kind of thing. But then when we get a little older, we start basing it off of, you know, social rules and social cues, what we think is right or wrong. When we're older, it's more abstract principles of what we generally have come to agree is right or wrong in our circles or in our head. So one way to measure how people are making moral decisions is with little vignettes where it gives you a moral dilemma and you say what you would do and possibly why in the moral dilemma. So Rest and some other scholars developed this defining issues test that was based on Kohlberg's stages of moral development. So what they wanted to look at here was a series of moral dilemmas. They wanted to offer different lines of reasoning for why people might have made a decision. And based on what people mark, based on what they thought was most relevant in their moral reasoning, they then had a scoring system where they could say basically what stage of moral reasoning you were at. If you were kind of more concrete, what people are telling me, through your more mature, principled, final stages of moral development. So you can see here, this one is about a man who is considering stealing food in order to save his family. So do you think this is ethical or not, that he's stealing the food? It goes into a little more detail, but that's basically it. So then you see it says rate the following 12 issues in terms of importance. So is the man courageous enough to risk getting caught for stealing? How much do you agree with that? How much, how important was that for you when you were making your decision of whether it was right and wrong? Shouldn't the community's laws be upheld? Was that a moral consideration you thought was important? Oh, well, it's the law and we have a moral obligation to our community to follow the laws so that things go well. So that might have been a more salient moral reason in your head. What I want to point out here when we talk about dual process is this is an example of moral reasoning, of a measurement of moral reasoning. So how you make these moral decisions, what goes into it, your conscious reasoning, what you actually think of when you're thinking about a moral case. And this is important because in the converse moral foundations questionnaire, moral foundations theory, that focuses more on your intuitive emotional reactions to moral decisions. So we can see here this dichotomy, how these kinds of surveys look different. In the Kohlberg and Rest defining issues test, you're going to see a vignette. You're going to have time to think. You're going to read these different considerations, kind of making your pros cons list. What do I think? And then we can have a descriptive, again, measure of where you are in your stages of Kohlberg's development. Definitely read on about Kohlberg's research, though, and Gilligan's research following it that has good critiques about the defining issues test and the stages of moral development that Kohlberg proposed to be more justice oriented, better for males, and shows males as more morally developed compared to females that have more of a care ethics in their morality. But all of the results showed that men were more better at moral reasoning, a higher stage of development, because the test was made for fairness. So see what you think about all that Gilligan and Kohlberg stuff. So switching gears here to another measure of morality is our moral intuition. So we're trying to survey here what people's initial gut reactions are to moral decisions, as opposed to their conscious reasoned ones, as they're looking through different reasons for feeling a certain way in a moral dilemma. So you can see how this survey looks different. You don't get a long vignette because they don't want you thinking about it. Again, this is supposed to be an intuitive reaction, quick. And so they want you to see really quickly what you're looking at. These are all one-line vignettes, you could say, but more like moral ideas. So the first one, you're rating which ones are most relevant. Again, similar to like the defining issues test, you're rating what's most relevant when it comes to your moral decision making. So whether or not someone suffered emotionally, how relevant is that to you? How much do you care about that when it comes to moral decisions? If you score high on that, then maybe you have some kind of care ethic like Gilligan proposed, versus how relevant is it to you whether or not someone's actions showed love for his or her country? How much does that loyalty piece matter to you? So that might signal that you make more moral decisions based on loyalty versus maybe your care ethic. Under here, you can see the original moral foundations and a little bit more about the evolutionary psychology behind them. But because the idea is that it's a moral intuition, what they're saying is that that intuition would have come from what benefited our ancestors the most and ensured our lineage is survival. So if you were in an in-group, if you were in a tribe and you were disloyal and you just betrayed everyone around you, you probably wouldn't survive very long. So this moral sense of loyalty might have developed from that, so that we have this intuitive response of, oh, loyalty should be something that's valued. I mean, after all, how do we come up with what these values are that are good? How do we know that being fair is actually good? You split it into equality and equity, and suddenly it's two different kinds of fairness, and you don't know which one is good or not. Why do we think that lying is wrong? Maybe lying is a good thing. So it's just a suggestion to look into some evolutionary psychology when it comes to morality. You can find that with Haidt's work. Graham has worked on this, Atari as well. But these are a couple examples of how we measure morality, so that when people ask you, am I a good or bad person? What is your assessment? You can say, moral psychology is descriptive, not prescriptive. Anyway, so as always, reach out if you have any questions or want to chat about some of this stuff. You can find me on my website, send me an email, and check us out on our TikTok and our Instagram at Jillian Lee Morality.